Dissenting in Russia is like playing the Russian roulette. The best case scenario is that you end up losing the regime's favor. The worst case scenario is that you end up getting killed. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because a Russian tycoon has died under very mysterious circumstances in Odisha, in India. His name is Pavel Antov. He was a businessman from the city of Vladimir in Russia, and he ran one of the biggest sausage companies in the country. His total net worth, more than $140 million. He arrived in India earlier this month with 3 others. They were celebrating Pavel's 66th birthday. Last week, which is on the 24th, he was found lying in a pool of blood outside a hotel in Rayagada. The assumption is he took his own life by jumping from the terrace. But the events leading up to his death are very strange. So let me recreate that timeline for you. Pavel and his Russian companions, 3 of them, reached the hotel on December 21st. The next day, Pavel finds one of his friends is dead inside his room. The body is surrounded by empty wine bottles. Now, according to the post-mortem, the cause of death was a heart attack. The cops then recorded statements from Pavel and his 2 remaining companions. 2 days later, on the 24th, Pavel's friend is cremated at a local facility. And on the same day, Pavel is found lying in a pool of blood. Sounds a bit fishy, right? The police says there is absolutely no reason as of now to suspect any foul play. They've asked the crime branch to take over the investigation as foreign nationals are involved. Meanwhile, the Russian embassy has also taken note of the death. Their statement specifically mentions that the police are not suspecting a criminal angle. Now, if this whole thing doesn't sound murky already, let me tell you what happened in June 2022. Pavel had criticized Russia's war on Ukraine in a social media post. Let me read out that post for you. And this happened right after a Russian missile had struck a city in Ukraine. So Mr. Pavel writes, and I quote, "A girl has been pulled out from under the rubble. The girl's father appears to have died. The mother is being pulled out with a crane. To tell the truth, it is extremely difficult to call this anything other than terror," unquote. That was Pavel Antov in June 2022. He, of course, ended up deleting that message after public backlash. He, in fact, had blamed a technical error for his statement on social media. But let's be honest here. Technical glitches don't cause long and detailed condemnations on social media. This was a calculated criticism of Vladimir Putin's regime. The question is, did that criticism come back to haunt him in India? Congress leader Manish Tiwari is hinting at something similar. He's pointing out that neither of the bodies was sent back to Russia. They were cremated and not buried, despite both men being Christians. Mr. Tiwari says if this isn't an unnatural death, he did not go to law school. Listen in.
A Russian oligarch, a war critic, an offbeat hotel, a colleague who dies under mysterious circumstances, a convenient window, another death, a cremation in India of 2 Christians rather than a burial, the body is not repatriated to their native country. If this is not an unnatural death, then I did not go to law school.
Okay, that was Manish Tiwari. Now, if you look closely at that case, you'll find that Manish does have a point. A lot of things do not add up. Number 1, a suspicious heart attack and a death. The body ends up being cremated within 3 days, even though the man is a Christian. Number 2, the tycoon dies on the same day as the cremation. His body, again, is not buried or repatriated to Russia. Instead, it is cremated at the same local facility. Isn't that odd? Number 3, look at Russia's tepid response. This is your richest lawmaker in your country. This is a man who is a billionaire. This is a man who's called the sausage king in your country. He dies, and you say, okay. The first death occurred on December 21st, and the second death happened on December 24th. But the Russian embassy responded only on 27th. And like we said, their statement was eager to dismiss any speculation of any foul play. Those are the three big things about these deaths that do not add up. The fourth issue, of course, is Russia's own track record. Political assassinations are not new for Russia. Putin's critics have regularly ended up dead in very mysterious circumstances. Let me list out some of the big names here. I mean, the list is long, but these are some of the big ones. Nikolai Gulshkov was a deputy director of Aeroflot. He claimed the Russians' airline was a cash cow to fund Putin's international spy ring. Cut to 2018, he was strangled to death. Another example is Boris Nemtsov. In the 1990s, he served as the deputy prime minister of Russia. But from the year 2000, he became a Putin critic. Cut to 2015, he was shunted in Moscow. Then you have Alexander Litvinov. He was a Russian spy who later became a critic of Mr. Putin. In 2006, he was assassinated by radiation poisoning. All evidence pointed to a Russian hand. Now, I could go on, but you get the idea. Vladimir Putin does not take kindly to critics. He simply doesn't like them. And since the war in Ukraine, such mysterious deaths have become more and more common. This year alone, at least 12 Russian tycoons have died under mysterious circumstances. Some were poisoned, some fell out of windows, like Mr. Pavel, and others were found hanging. But guess what? All of them had in common, they were all critics of Vladimir Putin. As for India, of course, this is a major diplomatic and political challenge. If the investigation does prove a Russian hand, what option does New Delhi really have? Yes, bilateral relations are very important, and Russia has been a good friend to India. But this would also be an affront to India's sovereignty because the deaths happened in Indian territory under Indian jurisdiction. Other countries have taken strict action after similar incidents. Let me tell you about the Salisbury poisoning in 2018. 2 Russian critics were poisoned in London, after which they spent weeks in a hospital. The British government accused Russia of attempted murder and expelled Russian diplomats from the country. Now, while of course India won't consider any such drastic measures, there will be public pressure on the government if it is found that there was some foul play in the death of the 2 men. After all, these people died on Indian soil under the watch of Indian authorities. Let me quickly go across to Dr. Swati Rao, who is an associate fellow at the IDSA. She's joining us on the broadcast. Dr. Swati Rao, what do you make of these 2 mysterious deaths in Odisha? Are things adding up for you, given Russia's own track record, dealing with dissenters?
Oh, yes. Good evening, Shreya. Absolutely. I think I'm not surprised with this news. Of course, I'm sorry about the way it happened, and it's very shocking, and particularly because it happened in India. And nobody would have wanted this to happen, of course. But I'm not surprised. I mean, we are not, when we are talking about Russia, we are not talking about a society or a polity that is sociologically, politically, or economically open in any which way. There has been it's been established again and again that if there is one thing that President Putin cannot really endure is dissent. And if there has been an entire, I would say, legacy of how, of a lot of controversial murders and deaths and all this, dissenters jumping out of windows, and eating poisonous things, and not just in Russia, but also outside of Russia. If you allow me a couple of minutes, I'll just tell you as to what really been the trend, to it. And every single time when President Putin is, trying to do something which he knows that is not correct. I mean, if you look at 2014 and how the Euromaidan thing happened, and then the annexation of Crimea, etc., whoever been criticized him. For example, I'm referring to this famous murder of Boris Nemtsov, who was gunned down, and he was an opposition leader, and he was just gunned down within a few meters of the Kremlin, and just days after he had spoken out against Russian intervention in Ukraine. And so it's like it's nothing new. And just a year later, in January 2016, you'll be surprised that a British public inquiry said that a former KGB officer, Alexander Litvinenko, was killed and he was poisoned. He was poisoned by polonium-210 while he was having tea in London, right? So this is not something which doesn't have a precedent. It's Putin and Putin's war machinery and, that secret service, etc., is extremely adept at killing dissenters inside of Russia. Of course, a lot of times goes totally unreported, but outside of Russia, of course, they're extremely adept at it. Alexander's, Navalny's case is very well known. Viktor Yushchenko, who was popularly, elected in Ukraine, and that was when the Euromaidan protest had happened, and he was popularly elected, while Russia at that time was backing up a candidate called Viktor Yanukovych, and Yanukovych had to flee, and of course, Yushchenko won. But Yushchenko was later poisoned and that disfigured his face for life. Similarly, you have precedent in Montenegro, where a Western government that was not really a favorite with Kremlin, there was a coup. They were trying to arrange for a coup, and that was planned by the Russian intelligence services. Similarly, and let me just tell you the most interesting bit.
Essentially.
Just yesterday, let me just say something important. Just yesterday, President Putin reportedly has sacked the head of his secret poison laboratories because he also criticized the war in Ukraine. Okay, so Colonel Eduard Chernyslov, he is 52 years old, and he was in charge of what is known as NII-2 FSB, which is a research facility. And that research facility is said to be the hub of Kremlin's development of deadly poison. So he also has been sacked. So there's nothing new about Putin's modus operandi of his critics, but that it happened in India. That we're talking about.
Again, Dr. Swasti, as I said, we don't know what happened in Odisha, but whatever has happened, it's not normal. There's something fishy about it.